Marhaba, ahlan wa sahlan, welcome. We're on Unit 6 now, page 118. And in this chapter, we're going to be talking about gender within the Arabic language, and we're also going to be doing 4 letters. So in this video, we're going to go ahead and start with talking about gender. Now, we know that all nouns and all adjectives in Arabic take either the masculine or the feminine form within gender. So there's these two categories, these two ways that we categorize words, okay, masculine and feminine. And so far, a majority of the words that we have done have been in masculine form, okay, because the feminine gender is marked by a certain symbol, which we're going to get into, okay. Now, let's look at an example that we have done. Remember when we said, if I wanted to say my neighbor, I would say jari. But if I wanted to say my female neighbor, if I'm referring to my neighbor and she's a woman, what letter do you remember that we added in the middle? It was this letter ta right here, jarati. And we saw the same thing when we said, okay, my husband, zawji. And if we wanted to say my wife, it's the same exact word, but there's this ta here, zawjati. And we saw the same thing with habibi, habibati. This right here is the letter ta, and that is going to refer to the feminine marker. And that symbol is what we call the Taa Marbuuta. Okay, so if you look at on page 118, it has here Taa Marbuuta. And it's a capital T because it's a ta. It's a heavy T sound, which we're going to get into shortly. Okay, and the Taa Marbuuta means tied. So if you think of a regular ta, this is a ta maftuha, a ta that's open. If you were to tie the ends of that ta, it would look like this. And so Taa Marbuuta often gets written as either a circle with 2 dots, or sometimes people write it as an actual little loopy cross with 2 dots. And of course, if it has 2 dots, then you can simply put a line above it. Okay. Now, the Taa Marbuuta is not a separate letter necessarily. Because it's a ta, it just happens to be tied. It has a grammatical function, however. So it's a symbol that has a grammatical function. And its function is to make nouns and adjectives feminine. Okay. Only nouns and adjectives. It's not going to make verbs feminine. It's not going to make prepositions feminine. It's only going to make nouns and adjectives feminine. The second thing that we want to know about Taa Marbuuta is it always goes at the end of the noun or adjective. Okay. So whatever that noun or adjective is, when it becomes feminine, or if it happens to be feminine, right, if it's categorized as feminine, the Taa Marbuuta is going to be at the end of that word. You're never going to see it in the beginning of that word. So if we look here, when we saw the word zawjati, this right here is the end of the word, right? That ta is the end of the word because it's wife. The ya here is simply my wife. We're adding this word my. So if you look at the original word that is feminine or is treated as feminine, it's going to end with the Taa Marbuuta. Okay? So Taa Marbuuta makes words feminine. The types of words it makes feminine are nouns and adjectives, and it always will be at the end of that word. The other thing in terms of the pronunciation is that whenever you have a word that ends in a Taa Marbuuta, most of the time we don't pronounce the ta sound unless it has a haraka, it has a vowel on it, or it's in a possessive phrase. Okay? Other than that, you're usually not going to pronounce it. So what you're going to instead do is simply pronounce a fatha on the letter before. So whatever the letter is before the Taa Marbuuta, you're just going to pronounce it with a fatha. Okay? So those are the rules for Taa Marbuuta. Now, in terms of how it connects, if it's after a ride or die letter, if it's after a letter that does not connect, you're just going to write it in its full form like this. You could write it like this, or you could write it like this. If it's after a letter that does connect, then it's going to look like this. You're going to draw a little flag shape, and then you're going to put 2 dots, or you can do a line. So now let's look at some examples. So let's do the one that I just did. We have the word jar. We're not going to add a pronoun to the end of it. We're just going to make it neighbor. Not my neighbor, just neighbor. This is masculine. because it doesn't end in a Taa Marbuuta. If I wanted to refer to a female neighbor, then I would add here a Taa Marbuuta at the end. And notice here the letter Ra does not connect, and therefore we're writing the Taa Marbuuta in its full form without any connection. And when we pronounce it, all we do is we pronounce that Ra with the fatha. Jara. Jar. Jara. So notice you're not even pronouncing the T sound. You're only saying Jara. You're just pronouncing with the A sound at the end. Okay. Let's do the same example that we did there with husband and wife. If I have Zoj, that's husband. If I want to make it wife, you simply add a Taa Marbuuta. So we take the same word, and now look here, Jim is a letter that connects. Okay? So because it connects, we're going to put here the Jim in initial position, and then draw that flag for the Taa Marbuuta. And in terms of pronunciation, we're going to pronounce the Jim with the fatha here. And I'm putting it in yellow because you don't actually, when you write a word out that ends in a Taa Marbuuta, you don't have to write that fatha because it's assumed that anytime you have a word with Taa Marbuuta, you will always pronounce the letter before it with a fatha. Therefore, you don't have to write it. Same way, when a majority of the words that we stop on the last letter with sukun, we know that we're stopping on it, so we don't have to write the sukun. So we have Zoj, Zawja, Zoj, Zawja. Now, when do we pronounce the ta sound? You pronounce the ta sound if you're adding something to the word, okay, or if you're putting it in a possessive phrase. Okay? So in this one, let's look at Jara. If I wanted to add my, if I want to make something my, I have to add a ya to the end of that word. Okay? In that case, then you're going to pronounce the T sound. And when you're attaching a ya, if you were to take a word that ends in a Taa Marbuuta, feminine word, and you want to attach a pronoun to the end, so you want to make it my neighbor, my wife, my whatever it is, then what you do to the Taa Marbuuta is you're going to open it. We call it iftah. We're going to open the ta so it looks like a regular ta, which will allow you to connect the next letter. So we're going to take the word jar, and instead of writing the Taa Marbuuta here like this, what we're going to do is we're going to write a regular ta and then connect that ya. Okay, jarati. So every time you guys saw words like this, jarati, habibati, ustadati, anytime you saw a word that was feminine like that, that ta is actually a Taa Marbuuta. And it just so happens that when you connect it to another letter, then it's going to open up and look like a regular ta. Okay? But the original word right here is this word, jara. Okay. So in that case, you are pronouncing the T sound because you're pronouncing the ta with a ya after it, jarati. Right? Whereas here, there's nothing after it, so we just jara. Okay. The other way that you'll see the Taa Marbuuta being pronounced is if you have it in a possessive phrase. Remember, a possessive phrase was when you have a noun and it's followed by a noun. Okay? So if I wanted to say the wife of someone, if I want to say the wife of a person, okay? So let's say my brother's wife. My brother's wife. And this right here, remember, is an example of a possessive phrase because we're talking about wife and we're saying whose is it? It's my brother's wife. So the person or thing that we're talking about, that goes first. So the first word is going to be wife, which is zawja. And then we're going to say my brother, which is akhi. And when you pronounce this, because this is a possessive phrase and those words go together, we're going to say zawjat akhi. And you're going to end up pronouncing the Taa Marbuuta with the sukun. You're just stopping at zawjat akhi. Notice here, jarati, you're pronouncing the ta, and that's also a possessive phrase because whose neighbor is it? It's my neighbor. So that's also possession. Okay? So those are the times when you actually pronounce the Taa Marbuuta. The other times might be if you have a word like this, like zawja, and it has a haraka on it. So let's say it has a fatha, zawjata, or if it has a dhamma, zawjatu. But right now, we're not looking at words that have haraka like that really on the last letter. So if it doesn't have anything, you simply stop on it. Without pronouncing it, you simply pronounce a fatha on the letter before. Okay? So now let's look at some words. I'm going to tell you some words. You write them down. So you can pause the video as always and then play when you're ready. Okay, we had the word for teacher, which was ustad. How would you make that feminine? So ustad, now you know, is masculine. How would you make it feminine? We would pronounce it ustada, and we simply put a taa marbuuta at the end. So notice the letter dal does not connect, therefore we're writing it like this, ustada. Let's do another one that we've done before. Habib, which was darling or sweetheart. So how do I make that feminine? So in this one, Habib, because the ba connects, we're going to open it to a medial position, and then we're going to put that flag for the taa marbuuta, Habiba. So Habib, Habiba. So if I took this word Habiba and I wanted to attach a ya here, then what I need to do is open up this ta so it looks like a regular ta, and that allows me to connect the next letter. So you would have Habiba, T. Okay. How about an adjective? These are all nouns. Let's look at adjectives. The word jadid. Jadid meaning new, and it's masculine. And one of the things that we mentioned before is when you have a noun adjective phrase where you have a noun that's followed by an adjective, they must match. And now you know they must match in gender. So they're going to match in number, they're going to match in gender, they're going to match in case. There's a lot of different things that they match in that we haven't covered yet. But what's important for right now is they match in gender, which means if your noun is a masculine noun, your adjective has to also be masculine. If your noun is a feminine noun, your adjective also has to be feminine. So if I want to say new teacher, if I want to say new teacher, I'll put it in a different color here. New teacher. Remember, teacher goes first because that's the noun. New is the adjective, so that goes second. So we would put the word ustad and then the word jadid. We've done this example. Notice here, ustad is masculine and so is jadid. But what if I wanted to say new female teacher? We're now talking about a woman. Ustada, and now our adjective also has to take taa marbuuta, jadida. Ustada, jadida. So same thing, if I wanted to say new neighbor, right, and we're using the word jara and it's feminine, then the adjective also has to be feminine. Okay. One thing to note is that taa marbuuta is not the only way to make a word feminine. There are also other markers. Like for instance, when we look at colors, there's a different way of making colors feminine. We're not going to look at that right now. But this is the most frequently used way of making nouns and adjectives feminine. Now, all of these examples that we looked at, Ustad, Habib, Jar, Zoj, these are all humans. Okay? So whenever we're talking about a noun or an adjective and we're referring to human beings, they can take both genders because you can have humans that are men and humans that are women. Right? And if you want to use a gender-neutral pronoun, we usually use the plural, which we'll get to in later chapters. Right? So in human qualities, you can have nouns that take both the masculine and the feminine gender. However, when we're talking about non-human things, non-human objects, meaning inanimate objects, if I'm talking about, for instance, a table or a chair or a car or a cup, those types of words that are non-human, okay, those words only take one gender. So either it's considered feminine or it's considered masculine. It's not going to be both. It's going to be one or the other. Okay? So human quality words, words that are nouns and adjectives that refer to human beings, can take both genders. And words that refer to non-human things, inanimate objects, will only take one gender. Either they will be considered feminine or they will be considered masculine. Okay? So for example, if I have the word bait, the word bait does not end in the feminine marker, taa marbuuta. It's a regular taa. Therefore, it is considered a masculine word. And it can never become a feminine word because bait is always a masculine word. It's always considered masculine. Okay? Same thing with any of the other words that we have done, majority of which are masculine, right? Taj, for crown. It will never be feminine. It's always going to be considered masculine. Okay? But then there are nouns and adjectives. There are nouns that are inanimate objects that are considered feminine. Okay? So I'm going to give you an example. Surah. Surah. Su. It's a heavy sound. So you have surah. And I'm telling you it's a feminine noun. Therefore, you know that when you have this ra, it's not just a fatha here. It's a feminine word. Therefore, it has to end in taa marbuuta. Taa marbuuta. Surah, vocab word, means photo, picture. So here's a word that is always considered feminine because it's always spelled with taa marbuuta. So if you want to describe this noun, if I want to say a new picture, we have to put the feminine adjective. So we have surah. The word jadid is new, but it has to end in a taa marbuuta to match the femininity of the word surah. Surah jadida, new picture. Another word that's an inanimate object, shajara. Shajara. Go ahead and write that one down. Shajara, هذه شجرة. Sha. Clear. Ja. Ra. Feminine word. Shajara. Tree. And this is a word that is always feminine. Another word, sayyara. هذه سيارة. 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 Not soy, but say. Starts with the sin. What makes the A sound is fatha and ya with the sukun, right? However, are we saying sayra or are we saying sayyara? So we're pronouncing that ya twice, which means it has to have a shadda. And the second time you pronounce it, we say ya. Okay? Ra. Sayyara. Sayyara. Make it a little bit neater for y'all. Sayyara, meaning car. So how would I say my car is new? You're going to write that down. My car is new. Remember, there's no word for is. My car is new. We have the word sayyara and we want to add my, which means you're adding a ya to the end. So that means what you have to do is make that a regular ta. After a ta would be an initial position, and then add the ya. Sayyarati, there's no word for is here, we just put the word for new. If you wrote jadid, that's almost there. What are you missing? Taa marbuuta, and you have to add it because sayyarati has a ta, which is originally right here, the taa marbuuta. So my car is new, has to match. Okay. Let's do a couple of other ones. Sayyid. Sayyid. Sayyid means Mr. or Sir. So you're going to make it feminine. You're going to say Mrs. or Ma'am. What will you add to it? Sayyida. Simply add Taa Marbuuta. Now, one other function that the Taa Marbuuta can play, and it's not always, but it can make a word singular specifically. Okay, so I'll put here specifically singular, meaning it's one of that thing. Okay, so for instance, if you have the word dajaj, dajaj means chicken, just chicken in general, right? But if I want to say specifically one chicken, you can add a Taa Marbuuta to the end, dajaja, and now it means one specific, one chicken. We can do the same thing with ward, means flower, but if I want to say one flower, we can say warda. Okay. And this was in a previous video. Some people, someone had wrote, I think we did a question or a sentence with, he took my chicken. And many people wrote dajajati. And the reason why is because you're talking about one chicken as opposed to chicken in general. Okay, so it can also have that function. But the main function of the Taa Marbuuta, of course, like we said, is the feminine marker. Okay, so it is the feminine marker. The letter before it gets pronounced with the fatha. It makes only nouns and adjectives feminine. And remember, human words can be both masculine and feminine. Non-human words can only take the feminine. And this is the only case where you have some non-human words that will take the feminine article, and that's only to make it one of that thing. Okay? But for now, we'll be focusing more on just feminine, okay, as opposed to the singular.